Hello, everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Atkin. I'm your host, Olivia Atkin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We will give you real life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Toni Gingerelli. Toni is an Associate Director of Policy and Advocacy for the National Alliance for Caregiving. She formerly served as a chief of staff to a New Jersey state senator where she oversaw office operations, communications, and legislation. You can find Toni on LinkedIn by searching Antoinette Toni Gingerelli. Hello, Toni. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Hi, thank you so much, Olivia. I'm really excited to be here.
To start off the show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Toni Gingerelli?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it definitely gives me some time to reflect on what's important to me. So for success for me looks like positively impacting people's lives, and that can be through daily actions or long-lasting change. And it's part of the reason that I pursue policy. And I think one of the things that's most important to me in that is doing it authentically and staying true to my values and who I am on that path to achieving that success. And lastly, in that feeling happy and fulfilled while doing it. I think a lot of times society has the standard of, once you achieve success, you're going to be happy. And that's not always the case. So making sure I'm happy in doing so is really important.
Well, I love the aspects you brought up there because it is so true in making sure you're fulfilled in everything you're doing while, as you say, being authentically yourself because and making sure we're holding our own selves accountable. Another aspect you brought up was making that lasting impact and that lasting good and being a part of making legislation is definitely that. You are a voice, you are making an impact that can affect a lot of people's lives. And, there can be a lot of misconceptions on what that truly means and what public policy can really look like in all aspects of it. So, to start off kind of talking about that, can you talk about what public policy is and why you started to go into public policy out of all the different ways you could be giving back to the community?
Yeah, 100%. It's so funny you say that about misconceptions about what public policy is. When I went for my master's in public policy, my family is like, what is that? Like, what is public policy? And, even in the work I do now, my family always asks, like, what is this? And the way I describe public policy is it's often used as an umbrella term, but it's how actions affect how actions that the government take affect us every day. So it's actions that the government chooses to take or doesn't take to address issues that impact the public. So this can be a variety of issues from climate change to healthcare to education. And in public policy, we think about all the players that influence change in our society. So, of course, government, but also the private sector, nonprofits, and the role individuals play in shaping this change. And I became interested in public policy after reflecting on my family's experience accessing healthcare and other social services. And particularly during college, I really began to explore how government and different systems impacted our lives and the lives of the people around me. And I saw influencing public policy as a way to create sustainable change that gets at the root of the problems that our society is facing. So I started by getting involved in advocacy and organizing in my local community, and it took off from there.
One of the things you brought up that I think is really important to remember is that you can affect change and affect public policy at all levels, whether you are in the government work, right? As for example, a senator or a aspect of it of the businesses, your local businesses or, an organization like Target that is all over the place, as well as the individuals who are in the community that are being affected by the decisions that get made. Can you dive into a little bit what individuals could be doing as well as businesses to really help affect the change they want to see?
Yeah, sure. So, I hear all the time from people that they really don't care about politics or it's not my thing. But it's so important that people stay involved. Policy impacts each and every one of us, whether we realize it or not, and the daily lives that we live. So, from the food that's on our kitchen table to where our kids go to school and what they learn to the state of the roads that we're driving. It's funny when I'm in the car with friends, they're like, oh, these potholes. Well, that's influenced by public policy, and people forget that sometimes. So it's really important that people stay involved and make their voices heard. Um, and staying involved means keeping our elected officials held accountable. So, on following through with their promises as well as the decisions that they make. So, of course, voting is one way you can make your voice heard, but there's so many other ways you can do that. So more directly, you can call or email your representative and share your opinion on an issue. And I can tell you from working in government, they track those, right? They want to hear from their constituents. They want to hear what's important to them. One, it impacts their elections, but two, also you know the policies that impact the people that they're there to serve. Um, so that's one way you can go about it. And I also like to stress that if you reach out to your elected officials, they're usually really excited to meet with constituents, them or a staffer, which often holds a lot of the keys in in making change, and people don't realize, like, oh, I want to meet directly with my representative, but staffers in these offices play a huge role, and that's whether it's on the congressional level or at the state or local level. Um, and with that, I also think that there are a bunch of other avenues that aren't as direct to your representative. So, letters to the editor in your local newspaper are spread wide and are play an important role in influencing the policy sphere. With the current organization I'm with, we just did a letter to the editor campaign to help people place different letters about their caregiving experiences, which has an influence on policy. And social media is another way that I think is really has started to shape policy in so many ways. Whether that's tweeting to a representative or sharing your thoughts or opinions or your experiences, is really important. And you touched upon, small businesses or businesses and the impact that they can have. When we think about public policy, a lot of people just think of government, but the private sector plays a huge role in influencing policy, and the decisions that businesses decide to make and what they decide to publicly support can also have influence. For example, Target, you had mentioned, but also small businesses sharing their voices and experiences in local government is really important. And then lastly, in that, where we choose to spend our money, has a huge impact. And if we're choosing to spend it in small businesses or businesses that support issues that are important to us, money talks.
Money definitely always talks, right? I think we all have seen that from different experiences that we have been in. And I love how you dove into different ways we can all be getting involved. And it can really, what you also did was span in how much time that can also mean.
Mhm.
A quick letter or asking for a meeting or getting involved in different organizations, all of those things have different involvement. And what you demonstrated in listing some of the ways you can get involved is showing, hey, you don't have to spend 60 hours in a month or whatever it might be to really have your voice be heard. It can be the small things as well. Um,
100%. Yeah, Olivia. And I think something that's really important and you touched upon is, not everyone's going to do advocacy or work in government full time, and that's okay. It's important that we have ton of different voices at the table, and that includes people who aren't doing this full time. And I know it can, in some senses, feel like a privilege, especially as you're balancing a lot of the other things that are going on in your life, from family to health. But I can't stress enough how important it is that your voice is heard. And I think one of those ways is through local and state government. A lot of times we see on the news all that's happening in Congress or federal government, and it can be a little scary and overwhelming, and just feel in some ways out of touch, right? And I encourage people to interact with their congressional representatives and work on federal issues. But one of the most powerful experiences for me was being able to work with like my local political party or be able to work in state government and see legislation, come to life in sometimes a matter of a year or less, right? So your mayor, your state representative, your commissioners, even your local land and soil commission, all are there to listen to you and are places where you can reach out.
And I completely agree with that. And it dives into what you had said earlier in your answer, as well as sometimes we all think you gotta talk to the top person in charge, right? That's the only way you'll be heard is if you go all the way up to the top person in charge, the top dog, right? When in
Yeah.
reality, that person in a lot of organizations, especially bigger organizations, have so much going on. They don't know
Mhm.
all the inner workings and what is happening on a daily level as the people underneath. And sometimes talking to the individuals who are working on those things every day is so important. And you mentioned that too, is people sometimes forget, they think, okay, I got to talk to that senator. They're the ones, but
Mhm.
they're getting information from the team that supports them as well. Everything is a team. So for you and the experiences you have had working for a senator, what was it like being part of that team?
Yeah, it was a really special experience. I worked for a legislator that I really enjoyed working with. And, it truly is a team effort. The senator or the representative that you're working for is guiding the agenda and where things are going and the values and the principles. But the day to day work of the staff is really important too, being able to provide the legislators with that data or that evidence for why that policy will be impactful and help the lives of their constituents. Being able to talk one on one with hundreds of thousands of constituents in the district and hear what's important to them and relay that to the senator as well, I think is uh, was really impactful in understanding the role people's voices can play in influencing policy and making positive change. And just also you know, being able to bring new ideas to the table. And I think one of those things that, the team effort aspect is we had a really diverse team in many ways. And we're able to bring different ideas to the table and help the senator move forward his policy agenda.
For you too, before we get on to your transition from working on a more state level to an
Mhm.
organization that is helping change policy and making that positive impact at a community level, as well as on policy topics, can you dive into, and you just started doing this, but what is a typical process for creating and getting policy approved and implemented?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can go into the more technical side of things, but overall, I want to kind of highlight the role that people can play, everyday people can play in this. So public policy starts with an idea. It's often based off of people's experiences, or and also should be driven by data and evidence. So you always like to use that example of the mom who is worried about there not being a stop sign at the corner and they're seeing the cars go by and um, how it's dangerous to possibly their kids crossing the street or people going to work every day and making that call to their representative. And a lot of times we'd also like to look at like where on that street, if there have been an increase in accidents or additional anecdotal evidence. So it all starts with this idea that usually comes from a problem that people see. And then from there is really about agenda setting. Like I said, making that call to your representative, getting it on the policy agenda when there's so many other competing issues, showcasing why it's important to you, why it's important to your community, and making sure it's on the radar of government officials, elected officials, and the people in your community is so important. And we see this done in different ways. Sometimes it's driven by polling, sometimes it's driven by organizing. A lot of times it's a combination of all of these things. But agenda setting is so important, especially when there's so many issues that are competing. And then from there, once it's on the agenda and people are ready to move forward, elected officials with policy, there's a lot of research that goes into understanding the topic better and creating policy that we know will have positive impact and trying to also reduce the possibility of negative consequences. Usually this looks like legislation, but it can be all different types of things. It can be regulations, it can be executive orders. There's all different varieties of policy. And then, once it goes through the process it needs to, in the case of legislation, going through the state house and being signed by the governor, or going through Congress and then being signed by the president, is the implementation part of that, which is so important as well, right? You can write a bunch of great laws, but if there's no process for implementing them, then what's the impact that it's actually having, right? So making sure those resources are there for the agencies or the organizations which are receiving the funding to be able to implement these policies is a key part. And then lastly is this evaluation of the impact, right? So we pass legislation, whether that's on wages or whether that's on healthcare, and we want to measure, what impact did this have on people's lives? Was it positive? Were there unintended consequences? And with that, how can we improve policy in the future, and how can it inform what we choose to move forward with as we progress and create new public policy?
And I think that process and knowing there's a process and procedure put into place to make sure there's checks and balances across all different levels. And as you're going through it, is so important to note as well. And it really also shows that people are listening and people are continuously evaluating it and going, okay, do we need to change this? Why might not it be working? And that is just as important as coming up with the idea or pointing out an issue, whether it's in public policy or, in your business or on a team, whether that's a sports team or a team you're working with on different projects. Being able to not just say, this isn't working, but being able to go, why isn't it working? Or here's a possible solution, or the idea is so important as well. For you, as you transitioned from working with senators in a capacity of chief of staff and in that part of it to now being the associate director of policy and advocacy for the National Alliance for Caregiving, how has your work potentially changed? And what does that look like now being on a different side of things?
Yeah, it's definitely different. I started my career right after college, actually working at a nonprofit before this as well, doing policy research as well as advocacy, and then switched to state government because I felt it was really important for me to understand the inner workings of how legislation is made and how it's passed in order to be a good advocate. Um, so right now, I'm really focused on helping to inform policy about family caregiving to make sure that the 53 million family caregivers across America are heard and feel supported through the policies that we implement or that we advocate for. Um, and we do this again through meeting with congressional representatives and helping advocates navigate their uh, state systems to advocate for this change. And to be honest, it's been really helpful that I have experience in government to know kind of, what elected officials are looking for and kind of what levers need to be pulled to make things happen. So that's a little bit about how my role has changed. And just to tell you a little bit more about the National Alliance for Caregiving, we are an organization that is focused on research, advocacy, and innovation to make the lives better for family caregivers across the U.S. So we take on a variety of different issues related to healthcare, workforce, mental health, all with the goal of better supporting family caregivers and building a care infrastructure in the United States.
Caregiving is so important, whether it's for the side of the person who's getting that care, or potentially sometimes the family member who becomes the caregiver, or that individual who has been hired in that role, making
Mhm.
sure their voices are heard just as much. Because sometimes, no matter what you're doing, when you're in the thick of it, and you know things aren't working out always positively, if you ask yourself, like, who's advocating for me? What are the positive things that I have resources for, or have the tools for, whatever it might be. So I think, for example, having national alliances that help those individuals and help in certain areas is such a positive effect. For you, when you got this role and you decided to take this challenge on, what made you go and work with the National Alliance for Caregiving?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess I can start a little bit further back. Working in state government for a few years, I saw firsthand how important it was to build up our care infrastructure. So just like we invest in traditional infrastructure like roads and public transportation that allow our communities to thrive, we also need to invest in social infrastructure for people to provide care and support their families. So I became really passionate about this on a personal level because I was a family caregiver to my grandma, and particularly watching my mom play the main role as a family caregiver for my grandma had such a profound impact on me. She cared for my grandmother while balancing two jobs to make ends meet. My mom would run home during her lunch break. Thankfully, she lived nearby to where she worked. And in between jobs to check on my grandma, make sure she was eating, making sure she was okay, making sure her mental health was in a good place. And at some point, it just became unsustainable. I watched the impact it had on my mom's health and financial security. And I knew my mom wasn't going through this experience alone. And again, I was trying to balance that with at one point being in school and then also having a full time role on my own. And again, I knew I wasn't alone. I knew she wasn't alone. And the data supports that. The National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP put out a caregiving in the U.S. report every 5 years. And the last report in 2020 found that 45% of family caregivers had had at least one financial impact as a result of caregiving, and 23% of Americans say caregiving made their health worse. And that doesn't need to be that way. We can have an infrastructure in place that um, allows people to thrive and be able to care as well as um, work and have fulfilling lives and be able to do the work that they care about and care for the ones they love. So as a result of this personal and professional experience during grad school, I focused on studying best practices and policies to support America's care economy. So there I worked on policy research involving the direct care workforce, like CNAs, peer support workers, and then paid leave access in the city of Boston. And it was after graduate school that I came across this role as Associate Director of Policy and Advocacy for the National Alliance for Caregiving, and I was ecstatic. To be able to work on an issue that's so near and dear to my heart every single day has been so special, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity.
And you brought up a few things that I think is so important to recognize. You went through an experience yourself, having knowledge and a perspective a lot of people might not have, and said, I'm passionate about this. I've gone through it. I have the experiences. And how can I make the impact as well? Like, what is the next thing I could be doing? And that is something I think we all need to think about sometimes, as we can pivot a role we're in or what we're passionate about and then change what we're doing accordingly. You're still affecting change, you're still making and helping make legislation that will help your community, but you're doing it from an organization standpoint instead, which you are hearing probably even more voices and getting even more stats on the topic to help be that advocate for others. And I think that, as well as the fact that you brought up the area of just wanting to dive in and learn. When you felt like, okay, I'm feeling this way, I'm seeing my mom experience this. Am I alone? I think we all forget sometimes that 9 times out of 10, if you're feeling away, there's
Mhm.
other people in your community, in your environment that are feeling the same exact way. And they might not feel like they have the voice, or they might feel like they're alone. And once you start bringing awareness to this and diving into that knowledge base, you end up building a community around it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you touched upon this importance of live experience. And I think a lot of times when we're, you know, talking about work, we only think about professional experience and like what that means. But I think lived experience is just as important, if not more important. And I'm not saying that you have to have a lived experience to advocate for an issue. I think it's really important to advocate for issues that don't just affect us individually, but impact others. Um, but I can tell you, and this is something that I love about working at the National Alliance for Caregiving, and particularly with my colleagues, is everything we do is centered around the experiences of family caregivers. We have, if you look on our website at caregiving.org, you can see that we have a map that includes the stories of family caregivers and talks about policies that are important to them. And that centers all of our work. We had the opportunity to um, hold our first national summit called Caregiver Nation back at the end of October. And we brought over 50 advocates to the Hill to meet with over 70 offices um, and share their caregiving experience. And I think that's such a key part of um, advocacy and important for elected officials to hear.
For sure. And I have another question, and I'm probably definitely going to put you on the spot with this one. So I'm giving you the
Okay,
heads up.
great.
But for those individuals who are caregivers, or people who are not caregivers right now, but again, we never know what turns life can give us and what can be put in our environment down the road. What are some facts that people might not know about caregiving in our environment, and what has that done, knowing those facts for yourself as well?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the number that always strikes people is 53 million. So that there are 53 million family caregivers. So those are people who are caring for individuals who are aging with disabilities, have chronic health conditions, cancer, wide variety of reasons. And that 53 million really strikes people. I mean, that's the size of some small countries. um, so that's a number that I think really shows why creating a care infrastructure in our country is so important. Um, and I think also this last piece of like, you're not alone. I know through that experience for my mom and also a bit for me, like there were a lot of moments where I was like, I feel like I have no support. And knowing that there are others out there who have these experiences and have others to lean on. And I think, when I met with a lot of our advocates at our summit, being able to bring people together and have those conversations about what they're experiencing is so, so important. So that's the one thing that I would really focus on. And also, we know from trends that that number is just continuing to grow. So it's more important than ever that we're addressing the needs of caregivers through policy.
And one thing within that number, because that, like you said, that is an impactful number, and it is continuously growing, because one thing that you pointed out that I think is really important to even focus on within itself is that caregivers are not just individuals who might be the children of a parent who is now getting older in age. It could be that parent who now has a child with cancer, that grown adult, that individual who is a spouse of someone with a disability, whether it just occurred or long term as well. And caregiving can look different to a lot of different people due to this
Mhm.
situation. And there can be a lot of situations that end up making you a caregiver. I think that's important to recognize as well, is that being a caregiver is not a one size fit all experience.
100%. And I think, you know, you mentioned, like, as you mentioned, we really want to make sure at the National Alliance for Caregiving that we see um, caregiving as a continuum, right? There are so many, there are points in people's lives where they're going to be caregivers and then other points where they're not. But we always say that caregiving is going to touch each of our lives in some way, whether we are, you know, providing care for someone or being cared for. We've all been cared for at some point in our lives. So that's why it's so important. And I think, we are trying our best to make sure in the coalitions that we build, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about some of that work that we're doing, that we're including all different types of voices. One of our new programs is a cancer caregiving collaborative. So bringing together individuals to inform policy about, the struggles that a caregiver of someone with cancer faces and how we can better support their mental health and their well-being and their financial security.
Yes. And give us an example of one of the initiatives you are working on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our main initiatives at NAC, and one that I'm, most excited about, is our Act on Raise campaign. So this campaign is focused on driving implementation of the actions outlined in the national strategy to support family caregivers. So this national strategy is led by the Administration for Community Living, otherwise known as ACL, and that's an agency within the federal government under Health and Human Services. And it was developed jointly by these advisory councils that were created by two acts, which were passed in 2018, the Raise Family Caregiving Act and Supporting Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Act. And with extensive input from the public, including family caregivers, which we talked about is so important, and the people they support, the strategy was released in 2022. So it was actually the strategy's birthday in September, which we celebrated. And this strategy represents the first time a broad cross section of the federal government has collaborated with the private sector on a response to the longstanding national need for a comprehensive system for family caregivers. So the national strategy includes nearly 350 federal actions across 15 agencies that the federal government can take to support family caregivers. And that's really what we are focused on with the Act on Raise campaign. And the strategy also has 150 actions that can be adopted at other levels of government, as well as the private sector. And this is all to build a national infrastructure that ensures family caregivers have the resources they need to maintain their own wealth, health, well-being, and financial security, while also providing crucial support to others. So where does this campaign come in? We bring together stakeholders across the caregiving continuum. So that's aging groups, patient advocacy groups, disability groups, and other caregiving groups to strengthen and accelerate the implementation of the strategy. And we're doing so through a variety of advocacy efforts with our incredible steering committee, as well as nearly 90 campaign partners from across the country and over 120 individual advocates from a variety of different states. And we're eager for more people to get involved and share their caregiving stories. So if people are interested in learning more, they can go to actonraise.org. So that's ACTONRAISE.org, and learn more about the campaign and sign up to get our advocacy alerts. And that's everything from letter writing campaigns to sign on letters to receiving templates to submit public comments on different regulations, to just social media kits. So it's a great way to get involved.
I love that. And I love how you brought up the different ways that you are making it easier for individuals to get involved and make their voice be heard. Toni, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah. So if you want to connect with me, the two best ways are Twitter and LinkedIn. So my Twitter handle is at Toni Ginge. So ToniGing. And then for LinkedIn, you can either search Antoinette Gingerelli or Toni Gingerelli. My full name's Antoinette, but my friends and family call me Toni.
Well, thank you, Toni, for all of your insight today.
Thanks so much. And it was a pleasure talking to you and sharing a little bit about care for infrastructure in the US and where we're headed.
And thank you for joining us and giving us so much insight about your journey, what public policy can really look like and how you can affect it, and what you are doing and what the National Alliance for Caregivers are trying to do to make a positive impact in the community. And a few of our key takeaways from today's conversation with Toni is stay involved. There's many different ways you can be involved and make your voice be heard, some of which Toni gave us examples of by voting, calling your email representatives, letters to a newspaper, having that newsletter go out or going on social media, tweeting your senators, getting involved with the National Alliance, like the National Alliance for Caregivers. You can go on their website and get those resource tools and be a part of that community, as well as diverse voices can help leave positive change, and a good listen a good leader listens to those diverse voices because we all have different backgrounds, different experiences that can make the positive change even better. As well as policy starts with an idea and then goes to an agenda and then goes to the making it a legislative act. And there's all these different policies and procedures that go into place along the way to make sure that it is as positive as possible and makes the best impact, as well as understanding how all of the pieces fit together can help you succeed in your mission and your goal. One thing Toni had brought up earlier, and I could not agree with it more, is sometimes learning about different aspects of a role you're doing or an organization that you're a part of can only help you succeed and bring your knowledge base to a whole new level, but potentially teach you about areas you did not know as much about and be able to leverage that and learn things and use that knowledge base in many different aspects of your life, as well as lived experiences can be just as important as the experiences and the notions that are on your resume. I think when we have different lived experiences, it gives us a knowledge and thought process that is different than just learning the tools to implement something or the way to do a job. When we get affected by something, going through that experience can give us those perspectives or thoughts of how can this be done better, just like Toni was saying. This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Toni Gingerelli. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.